Hi everyone, welcome to the Techie Garage. In the last two videos, we looked at how to set up KT-Lint and Detect to perform code analysis on our projects. And in today's video, we are going to be looking at how to set up CI/CD using GitHub Actions, specifically a workflow that now moves our lint checks on our CI. So besides us running the checks using KT-Lint and Detect on our machine, we can also integrate this in our CI such that when you open a pull request, the workflow runs automatically and it checks if the code that you're trying to merge into the repository using the pull request is actually passing all the checks. And what other examples of check can you do? So there's the one we've given the example of lint checks. You can do a workflow that automatically allows checking of unit tests when someone opens a PR. So if you're working in a team setup and someone opens a PR, you want to ensure that the pull request is not either introducing failing test or failing the tests that were already working in the code base before this is merged. If you're trying to maintain a specific percentage in terms of test coverage, you don't want someone breaking what is existing or introducing breaking tests. The other example is deploying code to production. So instead of every single time you want to do a release for your app, you have to go to Android Studio, create the app bundle, sign it with the key store and all these things, and then get the bundle, put it manually on internal testing track, and then promote it to production. You can have a workflow that automatically on, say, merge to a master branch, does all these things, bundling, signing the APK, and then deploys it to internal testing track. Then all you have to do is just promote this to the production track and make it visible to your users instead of having this repetitive tasks. So it makes work very efficient and increases your productivity as a developer. You get a chance to focus on other important things instead of this repetitive thing that you have to do all the time that you can easily automate. And why did we go with GitHub Actions? There are so many alternatives that you can use to set up CI/CD. So there's Travis CI, there's Circle CI, something called Bitrise, there's Jenkins, all these other options. And they are good. They have their own advantages also, apart from GitHub Actions, but the reason we are doing this is GitHub Action is very easy to set up. If you already have a GitHub account with a repository, it comes already integrated to it. It has an awesome free package. So if you're an independent developer wanting to set up CI/CD with a GitHub repository, it's very easy to set up. And yeah, so just probably as a quick overview, what is CI/CD? CI/CD stands for continuous integration and continuous delivery, and it is a DevOps practice that aims to streamline the software development lifecycle and allows for any changes that are done to be frequently merged into a shared repository and have automated things in terms of builds, tests, and deployment. And yeah, I think that's a quick introduction to CI/CD and a background of what you're going to do today. And just as a disclaimer again, is given this is a practice that's very general, as much as we are setting this up for an Android project, you can be able to set this up for any other stack, for backend, for web applications, all the other stacks that you're part of. So this is not only specific to Android projects. And yeah, so how do we go about setting workflows on our project? Or even before we go to setting up the workflow, what is the structure of a workflow? What does it contain, or what elements are there in a workflow that you need to think about when you're setting up a workflow? The first thing is a workflow is set up using, or GitHub Actions is set up using a .yml file. And I want to share a visual of an image of what a workflow generally has so that we can have a visual of it before we can actually go into configuring the actual workflow file. So assume this is the overall workflow. So what elements are in the structure of this workflow? So first of all, there's the event. This is the event that triggers the workflow to run. So if we are going to use, for example, the example of deploying an application to production, the trigger can be a push to a repository. So every single time there's a push to master branch, run this workflow. So that can be an example of an event that triggers. And we can look at other examples of events that exist on the documentation quickly. Events that trigger workflows. Let's see. So you have all this, the list of all these events that you can use to set up and trigger different workflows based on the use cases that you have. There's, for example, this. So it says, runs your workflow when an issue in the workflow repository is created or modified. Label, runs your workflow when a label in your workflow repository is created or modified. Pull request, which is what we're going to use today, runs your workflow when activity on a pull request in the workflow repository occurs. Push runs your workflow when you push a commit or tag, or when you create a repository from a template. So you have all these events that you can use to set up workflows. We are going to go back to the image again. So the event is what triggers the workflow to run. And the next thing you have is a job. So a job is generally what the word says. A job is a job, what you want the workflow to do for you. And a job has steps, so you can have more than one step. So for example, back to the example of deploying your application to production, the job can be deploying your application to production, but the steps of the job can be one, bundling up, setting up the app bundle, the next step, signing the bundle, and then the last step, deploying to production. So that can be a job, and then the steps in the job. And in a workflow, you can have more than one job. So you can have more than one jobs, and they can run in parallel or sequentially in case you want probably to use the results of one job in the other job. So yeah, so you have the event, you have the job, and a job has steps. And I think the last thing to mention is runners. So the same way, for example, we were trying to run commands for lint checks on our machine to check any issues on our project in the previous videos. If you want a workflow to run on your repository, then where does it run? It doesn't run like randomly in the cloud, or, well, technically it can run in the cloud. It can't run in the air, basically. So the same way you need a machine with a processing power to process this command and tell you if there are issues in terms of linting with your code or not, this workflow needs to run somewhere. So GitHub Actions provides different virtual machine runners. So you can have a macOS, Ubuntu, or a Windows virtual machine that runs this workflow for you. So yeah, technically, yeah, in the cloud. So that joke came together really well. But yeah, so the last thing that you have in terms of elements are the runners. So yes, so that's generally what a workflow entails. And now that you have an overview of what a workflow is, a background on CI/CD, we are going to try to integrate a workflow into the project that we did for linting in the last two videos. And you don't have to have gone through the last two videos, but I mean, if you go through them, fantastic. So on the repository for the last two videos, I have created a branch called fail lint check. So it's specifically a branch that is introducing something that is going to fail our lint, KT-lint or detect. And yeah, so to set up a workflow, you can come to your repository, go to Actions tab on your repository, and you can see here already you have a simple workflow setup done for you. So start with a file with minimum necessary structure. So we are going to click configure to set up, to have the one that is has a bit of setup. And yes, so this is a sample. It comes with already the structure set up for you. So Yeah, at the top here, you have the name, and this is optional. So the name is the name of the workflow. If you don't add the name here, it takes the name of the YML file. Actually, we need to rename this. So I'm going to call it run lint checks. And we want our workflow to run the KT lint and detect to check any linting issues. So I can explicitly also add the name here, run lint checks. The second bit we talked about is the trigger. So what triggers this workflow to run? So we can see in this case, yeah, controls on the workflow will run, triggers the workflow on push or pull request events, but only for the master branch. So yeah, you can see on push specifically on branches master, or on pull request specifically on branches master. So in our case, we want the workflow to run every time a new pull request is done. So we are going to delete this bit. And you can choose to also remove this if you want it to be on any pull request on any branch. Yeah, but you can customize it a bit so that also you're running workflows where they're actually needed and you're not just using or having unnecessary workflows. So we want to have it on pull request on branches master, which is the main branch we have. So you can just leave it with this one. The last bit allows you to run this workflow manually from the Actions tab. So this workflow will run when we have a pull request, but we may want to run it at other instances when probably there hasn't been a pull request. So this one will allow you to do it manually. Actually, I can just comment it so that we see without it where it's supposed to appear, or later on when we add it, what the difference it will make in terms of running it manually. So I'll comment that bit out for now. So the other bit we mentioned in terms of workflow is jobs. So here you define the jobs, and the job you have here is called build. So I'm going to rename this to our job. Our job is we want to run lint checks. And then the other thing we talked about is runners. So you can specify it to run on Ubuntu, you can specify macOS or any virtual machine provided by GitHub Actions that you want to use here. We are going to leave it as Ubuntu for now. The last bit is the steps in this job. So let's see. So the first step is checks out your repository. So you have uses actions checks out. So these actions checkout is already an existing action that you can reuse. If you look at this place, you have the marketplace where you have all the available reusable actions that are already set up instead of having to write the code for you to perform checkout in your workflow. There are some that you can reuse. So if you look here at action, checkout. So it's already an existing action that you can reuse. So what you want it to do at the start is check out the code. Once a pull request is done, check out this code, and we want to remove this because we don't want to use this. So let me remove. So first of all, you want it to check out our code and do the other things, then run lint checks. So let me get the other bit of code that we need in terms of steps. So the first step is it will check out our code. The next thing we want it to do is set up our environment with JDK 17, and this is already again an existing action. And the other thing we want to do in terms of our steps to set up this, the indentation is a bit off. Yes, so it's okay. The next bit is we want to make this Gradle wrapper executable so that you're able to execute the Gradle commands that check for KT lint and detect. So we are going to have that bit. The last bit is actually run the specific commands. Okay, so those are all the steps you're going to need for setting up our workflow to run our KT-lint check. So we've set up the name of the workflow, we have our trigger, we have the job that we want it to run, we have the runner that is going to do this, we have the steps of the workflow, and finally, completing a workflow that runs the linting checks on our repository. So we are going to, so we've given it a name. The other bit probably that you'll notice is this YML file for the workflow is created under a package called, a directory called .github/workflows. So you can add another workflow for unit test, you can add another workflow for deploying to production, and so on and so forth. So we are going to commit this file. So create workflow from link checks on pull requests and commit directly to master branch. Yes. So the other thing to probably note is, as you come up with workflows, you need to be very mindful and actually add workflows that are important for the processes that you want to automate, because for something, let's say as a pull request, if you have so many workflows running on a pull request, sometimes it may delay how long a team is going to take to, let's say, merge that PR. If you have said like every workflow should pass before a PR can be merged. So make sure the workflows that you're setting up to be checked are actually important for your team and make sense on, say, pull requests, or when code is merged, you're not running unnecessary workflows, because they also take time before they complete. So yes, we've successfully added this workflow. So the trigger is every time a pull request is done on this repository. So we want to go and create a pull request using our branch here that is supposed to fail that check. Fails link checks. Okay, and yeah, let's create the pull request. Require, okay, great. I thought we don't have the workflow. So you can see immediately the pull request is opened, it's triggered this workflow, and I cannot directly merge this pull request until this workflow completes. So let's give it time to complete, and you can actually go to actions here to see the progress on the workflow. So if we look at the running workflow, you can see what's happening. Yeah, and you can see where the job is. You can see the steps: checkout, setting up JDK7, make this executable, then run lint checks. So the command for kt-lint and detect. So let's see what the results are going to be. Yeah, and as that completes, maybe you can try look at this interface further. So as you add your workflows, if you come to actions, this is where all your workflows are going to appear. You can see the name is the name that we actually set up on that file. So you're going to have the list of all your workflows that you have here. And yes, so let's probably wait for it to complete. Yeah, so in any case, if this pull request fails, as a reviewer, if I come and realize there are issues with linting, I will just tell you, go and check linting issues, and then after you correct and this becomes green, then you can be able to review and merge this. And the other workflows that we said you can add is something like checking the any unit test breaking. Yeah, so based on the use cases that you have. As we wait for that to complete, I want to open Android Studio here so that if fix that issue. So yeah, already it's failing. So if we look at this, let's go to the details. Okay. If we go to the details, we can see why it's failing here. It's saying no white space expected before opening parentheses. So if we look at the file, what we have changed in this file, you can see here I deliberately moved the on create function, and then the first parameter I just moved it to the next line, which doesn't make sense in terms of structure. So let's see the error again. Let me no white space expected before opening parentheses and first parameter name. So for me to be able to actually pass this check so that my team member, assuming I was working on this repository with a team, can successfully review and merge this, I need to go and fix this file. So so let's try edit the file from here. Never actually tried this, so let's see if you can edit it directly from here. So I want to add a comment here so that it's still a valid pull request. It doesn't have 0 changes. Fixed failing lints. Commit the changes. Fix failing lint check. And commit this to the PR. Okay, so let's go back to this pull request again. You can see now with the new commit, the checks, the workflow is running again, and let's wait and see if it's going to pass. And if it passes, if you're able to actually merge, have a green here to go ahead and merge our repository. So let's give it time. Yeah, so I'll fix this. Okay. Let's give it time. So in terms of the time it takes, this is what I mean. So if you have too many workflows that are probably unnecessary and are checking things that you probably don't need to check, it will affect how long your team processes are. For example, for pull PR review, it's going to take longer if you have so many workflows. So probably have workflows that are actually important for the team on actions like a pull request or someone trying to merge into a specific branch. Yes, so be very mindful of the workflows that you're adding. And yeah, let's look at the progress. Okay, so it's currently running. As it runs, the other bit is, yeah, here you can see a history of the workflow runs that have happened, the events you have on workflows. Currently you have on pull request, the status of the workflows that have run. If you want to filter, say, the branches that you have. And yeah, okay, let's just go back. So it's the workflow has passed, and you can see I can now successfully be able to merge this branch since it's passing all the checks that we had. So we are going to go ahead and merge our PR now that everything is fine. So if you have something like checks, say linting issues, you have another workflow that checks that a PR is not breaking any unit tests. You're able to ensure quality in your code base. You're checking the essential things that you want to check as a team. Yeah. So the other bit that I wanted to showcase, I think that I commented out, was on actions here. Say you want to run a workflow beyond the trigger. You remember currently our workflow is running when there's a trigger, but maybe I want to run it manually. For example, a deployment to production, I can decide to deploy randomly from a different branch apart from master. if let's say our workflow was running every time someone pushes something to master, but now we have probably a random hotfix that is in master that I want to redeploy again or something like that. I want to add a way to manually trigger that workflow to do that. So we're going to go back to our workflow and edit it. So let's go to run min checks. I want to edit it directly from here. So let's allows you to run this workflow manually from the Actions tab. So I want to re-enable this. Let's commit changes. And commit this to our repository. Refresh. So if I go to Actions tab, don't know if it's yes. Great. So if I go to Actions tab and I go to something that like run lint checks, because I've enabled it to be able to be run manually, you can see here I have a new button that was not initially here to run the workflow manually. So I can come here and run workflow from, let's say, branch master. So I want to run this workflow on the code that's in master branch, and the workflow will start in a bit. So it runs the workflow to check on linting on our master branch again. So yeah, if you have more branches, you can choose different branches and all that. So yes, that's mostly it on setting up a sample workflow and setting up CI/CD using GitHub Actions. You can see pretty easy. The elements of our workflow and the structure are also very straightforward. And yeah, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and you're going to try setting up different workflows. I would love to hear what other workflows you have for your team apart from the three that you've mentioned. For example, running lint checks, testing for unit tests, and deploying to production. What other interesting workflows you have, or any other interesting things that you're doing with GitHub Actions for your team or your personal projects. But yes, so that's it for this video. If you got to this point, thank you so much and see you in the next. Bye.